Okay, my name is Joe Nash. Welcome to Meet the Author. Today we're talking to Jay Rogoff. A return visit, your second time here. His new book is called The Long Fault. It's a book of poems. So welcome back, Jay.
Thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here, Joe.
Okay, and I guess we're going to ask you, this new book has about over 40 poems in it. And before we start talking about your individual poems, and you're going to be reading some, I thought I would ask you about the state of poetry these days. The only reason I'm asking is because there's a lot of poetry around. If you read magazines and books and anthologies, I think the Library of America, I think over 40 of their volumes have poetry or are poems. And of course, if you listen to NPR, Garrison Keillor reads a poem every morning.
Poem a day,
so
right.
What would you say about the state of poetry, sort of in general, before we talk about your poems?
I think it's pretty healthy right now. A lot of people are writing poetry. There are creative writing programs proliferating all over the country, many of them low residency, so people who can't actually be on campus can do a graduate degree in creative writing. In fact, a lot of poets say that there are more people now writing poetry than reading it. The nice thing about what's happening in poetry now is that there's a real diversity of voices, there's a real diversity of styles, so that on the one hand you have people who believe intensely that poetry should be immediately understandable and that it should have some kind of form, that it should, many poets are going back to meter and rhyme. I use that a lot in my work. And then on the other hand, you have poets who are resolutely experimental. They're using found language. They believe that their poems should ride along on the sound of the language and not necessarily make intellectual sense to the reader. So you can see that it's a very broad marketplace, and a couple of the major poets that we have out there are representatives of one school or the other. A poet like Seamus Heaney is a perfect example of somebody whose care and intensive craft with form and with the language creates very strong emotional poems. And then a poet like John Ashbery, who is equally skilled, is much more interested in the idea of language as play, language as freed up from what it's talking about. The poem is an entity in itself that doesn't necessarily have a lot of responsibility to the real world.
Okay. Now, before we go with some of yours, where do you think you fall in that?
I stubbornly stick to the idea, I'm a kind of dinosaur, I stick to the idea that poems should be understandable. Not necessarily that they should be easy, but that they should resonate with the experience of the reader, that the reader should be able to imaginatively enter the world of the poem as a kind of virtual universe. I like to think of poetry as the ultimate virtual reality.
Okay. Well, I understood them all. I read them all.
Oh, great.
So great. I thought we'll start with inspiration, and then what inspires you, and I guess you could talk about how you could walk us through a couple of your poems, and then either read it first and then talk about it, or talk about it and read it, whatever you think might be better. But one I really liked in here, a good one to start with, might be the poem called Sublimated.
Okay. Well, my poems really can come from anywhere. They can come from an event that you witness or something that's happened in the world that you want to write about. Sometimes a poem begins because you get a rhythm in your head. It's a string of language, a string of words, and you want to do something with that. And sometimes multiple threads come together. A lot of what happens in this book, The Long Fault, is the coming together of various strands at the same time. And one of those strands is historical events. One of those strands is works of art. And the third strand is what I bring to it from personal experience and my individual imagination, interacting with these other elements to try to achieve something that's a whole, a finished work of art that yet also resonates with something that the reader wants to understand, some revelation. This poem, Sublimated, came from a couple of different places. It actually is an elegy for the second space shuttle disaster. And I knew I wanted to write a poem about that. One of the problems that I have is that it often takes me a long time to decide how a poem is going to work. So I'm not the kind of poet who, a week after the shuttle disaster or 2 weeks after 9/11 has a poem that can then be published somewhere as a response. It sometimes takes me months and years to see how my elements are going to put together.
In other words, you knew you wanted to write about the shuttle.
I did. And
you were just waiting for the
inspiration. Right. And in this poem, what I bring together is the shuttle, which is barely mentioned. It's almost mentioned as a side effect. But I wanted to bring that together with the idea of sublimation and the sublime. Why is it that we are always reaching for space? Why is it we are always reaching for something that is beyond ourselves? And that's part of what makes us human. And I play also with the physical concept of sublimation. In other words, the fact that there are certain compounds that will go directly from a solid to a gaseous state, skipping over the liquid state. Dry ice is the best example, but that's also what we see on snow when we see fog rising from it, and that's where the poem begins. Sublimated. Fog rising from fallen snow overleaps the liquid state. That's how I would like to die, raptured from gross solidity, a subject saved from predicate, the way a single contrail splits in 7 in the barely blue of barely air, the shuttle crew evading intervening states. We aim so high because we're low, citizens of gravity, collating wreckage that can't soothe lovers at the grave. Low flags mark our sublimity, while higher reaches thrum our nerves, as if in the flaring scratch of a phosphorus-perfumed match, some human element survives.
Very nice poem there. I like how you, what was the one line in here? I was going to say that I liked. Saved, or where was it? Fallen snow.
The subject saved from
Subject
predicate.
saved from predicate, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I just wanted to get that grammatical thing in. That's something that just suddenly occurred to me as I was writing. Hadn't planned to put that in the poem.
But you have the shuttle crew evading, like when you think of the horror of being up there, you would, hope, I mean, it's a horrible thing to say, but you would hope they died quickly or something.
Right. So you hope that they don't go through the terrible experience of pain, and that they are leaping up to some sublime state. And that line actually began as a kind of very silly idea, the idea that they were in their descent. They were supposed to make it to Florida, and they didn't make it all the way to Florida, and therefore there were states that they were evading in between. And that idea got thrown out of the poem, and I just left it as the idea of physical states.
A poem like this, as an example, like how long would you say it took you to complete it? Through its various...
This was probably a good 2 years until I was happy with it. 2 years. I probably started working on this, I think I did fairly soon after the disaster, and I had notes, and it got shifted around a lot, and I was never quite happy with it for a long while.
Do you write prose? I would think a novel might take you a few decades.
I wrote a very bad novel that nobody wanted, and that actually I wrote very quickly, and maybe that's the reason, I'm not sure.
Well, before we go to the next poem, I forgot to ask you this. The book is divided into 3 sections.
Yeah.
In time, in camera, inevitable.
Right.
So I think people probably know what the inevitable poems are about. But I was wondering about the setup. And then we have another poem called Pyramid of the Sun we could talk about.
Okay.
I was wondering about the division.
Yeah.
Is there any particular reason?
Well, I like the idea of playing with the in. So in time, in camera, and then we get the punning inevitable, where the in is used in a very different way. Well, the poems in time deal more or less with the present, but also with the idea of trying to achieve something in time. I mean, not only in the time that we have, but before it's too late. So in time, in that sense.
Well, I think a lot of the ones in time they're set sort of in the present.
Yes.
Whereas some of the other ones are either in the past or you're meditating on the past or whatever.
Yeah,
Or
I think that's right. In camera, the second section grows out of the fact that I was writing for a while a lot of poems about photography. Especially early photography. I became interested in looking at daguerreotypes. I became interested in looking at some of the early experiments in photography that Fox Talbot was doing in England. We're talking about the 1830s and 40s. And along with that, along with this prehistory of photography, I became interested in what was for me a prehistoric photograph, a snapshot that I discovered that was taken of my wife before I knew her, when she was 15 years old, and I began writing a lot of poems about that photograph.
Well, there's a series. There's like 5 poems in a row in here about your wife. Pictures of your wife when she was a teenager.
Right.
Is it the same picture, or are some of them the same?
It is. It's a single picture. My original crazy idea was to write a whole book of poems about this one picture, but that went by the wayside. But I did end up writing about 7 or 8 poems, and several of them made it into this book.
And then the third section.
And then the third section, Inevitable. One of the things that the book is about, as I keep advancing into middle age, is my own and everybody's mortality. Yes. So they become meditations on the fact that we're all headed for the long fall, and what can we do about it? What do we do with our time in the meantime?
But a lot of them also, and then we'll talk about this later when we read a few, how the past is present in the present. The past impinges on the present in a lot of these. So
always, and it does so in historical events. There are historical events in the book ranging from Eden to mythical events like Eden and the Trojan War, up to the Iraq War, with stops in between in the Middle Ages and modern history and so on.
Well, next poem I think you could talk about, the story behind it kind of and how it built. This poem in the first section called Pyramid of the Sun.
Yeah, this is a poem that brings together a number of different elements also. It's really written for my son-in-law, whom we were visiting, my wife and I, in Mexico. And the poem is set in Teotihuacan, the Aztec city that's outside of Mexico City, where the Pyramid of the Sun is the large pyramid. And I got interested in the history of the place, the fact that this was a city that had 200,000 people living in it that's no longer there. It's an architectural ruin. And also the connections with his life and his relationship to his father, which led me to think about my relationship with my father. And so those are the main elements that are going on in there. Pyramid of the Sun. You're bringing your father back, not from the grave, but the years-long granite acquiescence of Alzheimer's, and from the liquid silence of decades before. You want him to live out of the air, out hanging with Pynchon in Ithaca, boozing with Farinha, flooring it on a loose change odyssey with a physics professor's daughter, a siren named Mary you'll track down if living, if she's still sane. We climb the Pyramid of the Sun, the roof of Teotihuacan, and as I'm listening, my heart goes out to you, my son-in-law, whom I love, whose father I need never be, being no Odysseus. Thank the gods in Florida, my own father's there, all there, living the life every retired hero deserves to lead. Stone crab, high cholesterol, and a woman loving, faithful. Luck. Some get chosen human sacrifices, hearts going out to feed the gods who will thank the desert with rain. Now together we stand atop. I'm out of breath. I gulp thin air and sneak your photograph against the ghost city where once lived 200,000 who constructed this mountain among the sacred mountains. In the clouds, Quetzalcoatl and all the serpent gods burn up, ignited in the falling sun.
Well, this poem seems to have a lot of the elements a lot of your poems have. You have current situation, you have history impinging on the, you have the little humor in there with the high cholesterol. And
right. And my father likes the poem, but he protests that his cholesterol's fine ever since he's on a statin. Right, and the Odyssey gets in there, and
you got some, yeah. And well, there's also several poems in this book about Mexico and being down in Mexico.
Yes.
That if people, we're not going to do all of them today, but
right.
people will get to see. So speaking of inspiration, a lot of your poems deal with, as we've said, art and I guess contemplating works of art in all its forms, photography, art. There's several poems in here where you visit cemeteries and you're talking about what's sort of on the thing.
That's right, that's right.
And there's a few in here where you visit authors' homes and graves. So then you have two poems in here about Jane Austen,
yes.
which are really nice poems. I thought you could talk about these two and how they came about, then, or
okay.
talk about each one, then read each one.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, there are several poems in here. There are many poems in here that deal with works of art, and then there are several poems that deal with writers that are important to me. My wife and I travel a lot. She's an art historian, so we end up going to Europe quite a bit. She works on medieval and Renaissance art, and as a result, I find myself spending a lot of times in museums, and on this one particular trip to England, she reciprocated by spending a lot of time in the homes of writers.
Is she more interested in art, or you're more interested in writers? Is that
Well, not necessarily. I mean, she's certainly more interested in art, but I find that the imagery in visual art really helps me focus my attention, helps me focus the feelings that I want to get into a poem. And I think what also happens is that when you travel, you're much more attentive to the dailiness of your existence, because suddenly everything is strange and everything becomes significant. So that it's a very good way to really help yourself decide what it is you want to write about.
You can sort of see better when you're traveling.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. So anyway, these Austen poems came about for a couple of reasons. One is that we visited Chawton, which was her last house out near Bath in the west of England, but another poem came about because I'd written a poem once before about Austen and baseball. It's in my first book, The Cutoff. And I thought it was time to revisit the subject. So this is called Jane Austen, Inventor of Baseball. And it has an epigraph from Northanger Abbey, which actually mentions baseball. It was not very wonderful that Catherine Morland, the hero of the book, who had by nature nothing heroic about her, should prefer cricket, baseball, riding on horseback, and running about the country at the age of 14 to books. So this is Jane Austen, Inventor of Baseball. How to learn the signs, how to decide to commit, how to know mere manners from true ardor, how to take a pitch, how to hang in, how to foul off Wickham's trick deliveries, how to connect with Darcy's devastating curve or Mr. Knightley's high hard one, how to dust yourself off from a brushback, how to read the rules to your advantage, how to plot a strategy, how to work out the crucial late walk under fading light with the moon rising over the fence and nightingales singing their anthem, how to protect your lead, how to hit and run, how to rally when visitors keep chipping away, how to play defense, how to guard against the steal, when to play for one and when to try for two, when to sacrifice, how to negotiate long-term contracts, how to determine if and when it's safe to come home, how to read.
Well, that's, many people have said, all you need is Jane Austen, and you can, the only books you need. Some people would say that.
That seems to be the current bias.
I know, but
yeah. But it is true that she does teach you how to read. Her novels are novels that are all about reading people, and also in our reading them, we learn how to read each other, but we also learn how to read novels themselves. They repay the closest attention, and of course that's what poets want people to do also, to attend closely.
And so. And combining it with baseball, I know baseball is one of your big passions.
It's a passion,
so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, the next Jane Austen poem is about, I guess you're sort of wandering around Chawton.
Oh, yeah.
And then maybe you could read that one or explain.
Yeah. This started off in a more casual way. We were at Chawton, again, Austen's last home, which is where she wrote Persuasion, her last completed novel. and I was just. It was just one of those moments when you were in a place that you know has been inhabited by someone else. There's a poem about Samuel Taylor Coleridge in the book also, in which I really got the chills being in the room where he wrote poems like Frost at Midnight and The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, but especially Frost at Midnight, which is a poem that I adore. And the same thing happened here at Chawton, at this Austin residence. And I started thinking about the subtlety of Austen's novels, and also about the fact that Austen had written these 6 terrific novels, and had died, long before the age that I happened to be at that point. So what was I doing with my life? Anyway, Chawton. Ms. Austen, I started out Ms. Austen because I thought she would appreciate being called Ms. Ms. Austen, I'm past your age when you died. And where are my 6 delightful novels, 4 of them masterpieces? So I wander through your last house, rather gaga you could read the world the way we must read Emma. Ears pricked by the over-emphatic rattle of a teacup, sniffing the subtle shift of molecules aloft in drawing rooms, the rancidness of condescension souring the clear ozone of magnanimity, recording the flirtatious rustle of a sleeve or cuff, an art of innuendo, of chances mostly missed, of hems muddied, of half-smiles and raised eyebrows flat ignored, a world where everyone is always reading. You permit us, rarely, the second chance to put things back, to get them right, and, more rarely, that mystical phenomenon, marital bliss, the happy creatures fruitful in the garden with serpents nipping at their ankles futilely. In the drawing room, bent over your small round table, you write a firm, deliberate script, apparent as daylight, as blunt as Darcy, a hand so clear it harbors you in every loop and whirl, sheltering you inside your woman's work. The mystery of life itself, so much for Mary Shelley. From nothing, from air and ink, while eavesdropping for footsteps on the stair, the flinging of the listening door that makes the whole world disappear beneath a blotter or inside a folio. Your roses and snapdragons chuckle out in the garden. You're working on persuasion. I turn the doorknob, dying to catch you, but the hinge squeals and you're no longer there.
Well, I really like that poem.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
Now, this is a poem that sort of, I guess, reaches an epiphany of sorts. Mm-hmm. And I guess one of my questions about poetry is, or for people who may not, should poems have an epiphany, or should they reach, many poems are just a statement, many reach an epiphany, some moment of insight. Mm-hmm. I mean, should a poem do that, I guess is the question, or they just are what they are?
I think poems need to have a kind of climax. It can be a moment of epiphany where the reader suddenly has an aha moment, or it can be a moment of language where suddenly the reader thinks, "Wow, I've never heard it put that way before, or I've never had this idea, or I've never heard that string of words." So I think there are a lot of ways in which poems can be transporting, and even the most mundane sounding poems can be transporting. There are moments that I I have to say, there are moments that I admire in my own poems that I think are a lot of fun. There's a poem in here called "Mennonites by the Sea," in which I watch women who are dressed in long 19th century style gowns entering the water. They're bathing in their dresses, and it's a description of that experience. And towards the end of that poem, I suddenly came up with the line, "They wear their dresses as the fish wear water," to express the naturalness of this. And for me, that's the climax of that poem. I don't know if it is for anybody else, but that's the moment where I want everybody to have a kind of little frisson. Whether it happens is up to the reader, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, one thing about your poems, or many have to do about works of art, and I thought the cover of your book is a painting by, or an illustration by John Curran, called Stanford After Brunch. So I thought maybe you could read this poem, and then as you're reading it on the screen, people will see the cover of the book. And
that'd be great if you could show that.
And then maybe you could explain sort of, I mean, his art has these exaggerated physical characteristics, but I wonder why you said you were really taken with his art.
Yeah, Curran is a contemporary painter. He's very popular now. In fact, he's rather controversial because recently his work has been fairly pornographic. His current work is the work that I write about is not. You'll be relieved to hear, but I wanted to start with this idea of exaggeration in his work and see where I went from there, and in simply describing the painting and my response to it in a kind of art critical way, I hope the poem takes me somewhere else. 3 women. Everyone's head's too big. Everyone's neck's too long. Everyone's knees are a bit too sharp. In every way, the painters judged them wrong. The upholstered chair crowds the upholstered couch, so the woman at right appears to have one leg wedged between the furniture. Ouch. But she grins heedlessly, a rich rag, once a husband's shirt, knotted round her head in a lusciously carefree coiffure. A round dome palpably echoed by buttocks that project far past the frame to tender an insolent offer, eluding the eye, embraced by the imagination, the dirty imagination, the jittery thrill of this exercise in uncanny titillation. I adore the beautiful middle figure, blonde hair pulled tight and cascading around her stretched bronzino throat, her smile an emblem of occult delight. She tucks up her too scrawny right leg, and I can discover her left leg and her right arm nowhere. Her face betrays a gleam from nowhere, stupidly brilliant. Her serene, downcast eyes almost distracting from how, reckless of nature, her amazing, realistic eyebrows rise an inch too high on her forehead's cool slate. The dark-haired woman at left laughs so hard she squints, her hand a claw, her upper teeth glinting in lamplight like a scalpel blade. Clutching little cigars, martini glasses chiming in a triad, they enjoy a cackle at the fruits of happiness. The room hums homey with conspiracy, a rumbling hum, shuddering safety glass, scorching books, sparing dental evidence from blown-up buses, holy sites, whole cities resurrected picturesque as ruins in coffee table books browsed by 3 women, hot as foregossip, cool as an after-whisper, spinning, shearing, and casting us out to moan in an envy inevitable as winter.
Well, you make them seem like real people when you're reading that.
But then by the end, when I introduce the current events, the explosions, the suicide bombers, all those allusions, they've turned into the fates. They're the ones in control of our destiny.
Oh, now I get it.
I was kind of shortcutting that because of our time.
Well, we can go a little bit over, but we have time for one more poem. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all, but okay. I'll just tell people that Jay's book is in our library, and you can come and check it out if you want. But the one poem I really would like you to read, you could talk about briefly. It's Memorial Chapel.
Yeah.
I think this is in Union College, isn't it?
This takes place right near here at Union College, and most people know that there's a wonderful chamber series there, and it's also a memorial chapel. There's a monument with the names of all these Union College men who were killed in World War I.
But this also has a lot of your theme, past, present, sort of some serious. There's a serious, and yet there's a funny line about being a college student. Well, we'll read this poem.
Right, and it brings together history with art, music, architecture. Memorial Chapel. We've arrived expressly to be transported, while we sit stock still in the college chapel's 1800 federal architecture, witnessing music. Schubert, Bach, Prokofiev, Shostakovich, week in, week out, making this room a spare, sparse paradise, a garden where sound waves loiter, rounded to crystal. Now, for instance, Beethoven's Grosse Fugue in B-flat major scrolls from the quartet's guts. While listening, I study again the names carved back of the players, marble-clad memorial to the Great War dead, the undergrads and alumni who got butchered, giving Europe democracy it didn't desire, and lie transported off overseas. The Grosse Fugue spreads thick, deciduous layers, oral flavors, ash, ambrosia, in living ears unstopped with the earth, unlike the ears of Wesley D. Carker, Luther Hager, William W. Waiteskill, Herbert Rankin, Talbot Carmichael, Alan Ashton, Kennedy Conklin, Walcott Calkins, Alwyn G. Levy, Howard Thorne, and dozens more stone deaf to the music, deafer than a post, than Beethoven. College guys now deafer than when they sat in boring lectures and dreamt that bloody high romance, imagined those French jeunes filles, but found nothing transporting them, no returning, even as cargo.
Well, a rather somber note to end on, Jay, but we really appreciate you stopping by, and thanks for coming down and being on Meet the Author. And if you have another book of poems in a few years, I mean, that one took 2 years, hopefully it won't take that many years, and you can come down again, and we'll see you then.
I'd love to do that. Thank you so much, Joe.
Well, thanks for watching Meet the Author, and we'll see you next time.